Hi, and welcome to the Startup Leaders Show, where we learn lessons from leading startup founders and executives. I'm your host, Lisa Dreher. I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, Gunn. He is founder and president of Caliber Consulting and a mentor for SCORE. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Oh, thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so maybe you can start by giving our audience just a little bit of background about Caliber Consulting and how you came to start your company.
Yeah, I've been in business as an independent consultant now for 24 years. Prior to that, I worked for Chevron for 14 years. I actually started pumping gas for Chevron way back in the early 80s. And then I had my career for 14 years in lots of different roles. And then I started my independent consulting 24 years ago in the area of expertise that I had, which was petroleum downstream marketing side. And since that time, I've worked in probably 49 states. The only state I haven't gone to is Alaska. Everybody I work with is a privately held family business. Most people don't know that when you look at the gas and diesel and all the stuff that we put in our cars today, 95% of that fuel goes through a wholesale distributor. The oil companies make it, but they don't sell it. It goes through a distributor. That's how the model is in this country. And 95% of the wholesale distributors are privately held family businesses. That's who I focus on.
Yeah, I was so amazed to learn that. So maybe you can also talk a little bit about SCORE. So I'll give a little bit of background here. Ken has been my SCORE mentor for over a couple years now, and having Ken as a mentor has been amazing. So maybe you can tell the audience a little bit about SCORE and the value that SCORE brings to new business owners.
Yeah, SCORE is a organization that operates underneath the umbrella of the Small Business Administration. It's a nonprofit group. It has to come up with a majority of its own income through training and resources it puts out there, these classes, so that it can continue to operate. The SCORE mentors, there's thousands of us around the country and hundreds of offices around the country. And folks who are either in business that are finding challenges and they would like feedback, or somebody just to tell them, here's some areas to consider, or somebody that is brand new to starting the business, like Lisa was. What are the steps to go through? How do you get yourself set up with an LLC? How do you get set up with your local business license? The more daunting thing can be, how do you work through taxes? What do I have to pay? I was used to getting a paycheck and they did all the work. Now I have to do it myself. The SCORE mentors all have different areas of expertise. They can be social media people, they can be attorneys, they can be CPAs. I'm more of a business generalist. I have my own company, so I understand the processes and what I have to do to stay in business and stay on task, basically. And so folks can sign up through SCORE at score.org and find a mentor that's local to where they are. And the nice thing is, it's all free, so it doesn't cost you a thing. And it's one of those things that I always advocate. Don't try and do things all yourself. Leverage other people's expertise, and SCORE is a good place to do that with.
Absolutely. I agree. I can't emphasize it enough. For anyone that is certainly just getting started, it is a great place to start. So let's jump into some of the content here, and I have some questions that I want to ask you about business. And maybe you can, as you're thinking about answers for these, you can think not only about your business, but maybe about some of the businesses that you've worked with through your time with SCORE. Which actually, before I jump into that, how many companies or company founders would you estimate you've worked with since you started working with SCORE?
I've been doing this now for a little over 3 years, and I would say that easily probably a good 130, 140 folks, right? Some people get into it, they find out what they need and they move on. Others drill down and realize what they wanted to do, what they dreamed about, just wasn't going to work for them. And that's okay. It's nice that you can come to that realization. Currently, I looked at the list the other day, 32 active folks that I mentor, either monthly every couple of months, once a quarter. When folks get started with me, it's usually monthly. And then after a while, it gets to be stretched out longer because somebody just wants someone to talk to, give them feedback. I usually play the role of devil's advocate, not because I don't agree with folks. I just want to make sure they've covered all their bases. Be honest with themselves.
Sure, sure. Okay, great. So I guess thinking along those lines, obviously you've seen businesses really have great success and maybe some not so much. So what would you say are the biggest keys to business success?
I always try and tell folks in the beginning that, and it's just a cliche, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You got to be patient. You got to work the process. Don't expect everything to fall in your lap. It is work to start a business or when you're in business privately, to go through that. So be persistent, keep yourself focused, and quite candidly, problems will happen. How many people could have figured out that COVID was going to be happening last year? The reality is, we knew it was going to eventually happen, just not when, and it did. And guess what? So you had to adapt to that. I can tell you one example I had to adapt was not too many years after I started my consulting, 9/11 happened, okay? And all my clients that I target to go out and work with, they all locked up their budgets, okay? So consultants, when you look at an income statement and expenses, consultants are aligned. It's very easy to X out. Say, no, we can wait another year. And so I will tell you, the year after 9/11, it was a very, very quiet year. So I always advocate to folks that they want to keep their personal demand for cash, the draws that they would take out of the business, keep that low until you've built up reserves. You can have a phenomenal year, and it'd be nice to think that will always happen, but the reality is it won't. There will be dips. And so budget for the dips, and don't think that great years are just going to continue forever and go out and buy that really cool car, right? So anyhow, those are some of the key things that I point out to folks.
Great. What would you say is the most valuable business lesson you've learned over the years?
Thankfully, I think I learned this early on. Don't chase the shiny objects and butterflies, right? So, and meaning that you can be looking at something like butterflies are really cool and they're beautiful. But if you spend all your time chasing them and you catch it, you really find out there isn't a lot there. Same thing with shiny objects. I early on, I got involved in some projects that just sucked up, and working with some other folks, sucked up tons and tons of hours. And it resulted in nothing because I was looking at the bigger opportunities, not the ones that were more practical to go after, right? That would generate revenue. Trying to hit a home run, baseball is a game of singles and doubles, right? That's what wins the game. Home runs you can clap and have fun with, but man, unless you're a really good baseball player, you're not going to hit a lot of home runs. So you got to play a game of singles and doubles.
Yeah. I'm going to take you back in time now a little bit. So knowing what you know now, if you could have given yourself a piece of advice when you first started out, what would it be?
I would have scoped out my direction in the beginning. In the beginning, I had to learn by doing. And I really didn't have a specced out business model of where to go. And part of that was because I worked in an oil company and I didn't have a Rolodex when I left. I had a Rolodex of who I knew in Chevron, but I didn't have a Rolodex outside of Chevron. And so in the beginning, I was looking at lots of different areas. Thankfully, they were the right areas, but I didn't have a good structure of how I would attack them in the beginning, and I should have. It would have saved me money. Ultimately, I would have done the same things, but it would have been in a different timeline, right? Mm-hmm. And so that I wish I had done in the beginning. I still got through it. It just was a little bit hectic for the first couple of years and being a little more scattered. And that's how I teach people today is to plan. So I learned by doing, and it also taught me what to teach others. So
yeah, of course, as you mentioned earlier, the best laid plans, right? things happen. And so that, I guess that flexibility comes in that you mentioned as well. So you can make
Yeah.
all those plans. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you one thing that um, I figured out fairly quick when I did get out there is when in the industry I've worked in, there's different associations. And I will tell you one of the key things I've always found when I started, the internet was not as active. You didn't have the LinkedIn's, the Facebooks, and different ways to market what you did. So a lot of what you did from a promotion was more in person. You had to go to conferences and meet people. And it was advised to me that the best place to meet people is after you've been a speaker. So one year I did talks in 30 different states because every state has an association in my industry, right?
Yeah.
However, after all the talks, everybody knew me by name because I was in front of them. Today, there's different venues like this that you can get in front of folks. But back in the day, it was a lot of plane rides and doing things for next to nothing, and that was okay. You kind of get through that. So yeah. But the big thing was I honed down my focus because I could have gone after associations that had thousands of members, and I honed into one association that its core group of 250 members represented 40% of the U.S. market for gas and diesel. I can market to 250 people. I can't market to 10,000.
Right. That's really good advice because my next question was going to be, how do you decide what to do and what not to do? But that sounds like a really great way to kind of narrow in on, what it is that you should be focusing on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's how you reach them because way back in the day, like I say, you had to do it more in person than you can do it today, right? So
Yeah.
things have changed so much. But even then, you still want it, for me, I focus in my industry for the mid-tier, smaller companies. I don't go after the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, and it goes back to my time at Chevron, bigger companies have a little more corporate structure and so on. They don't move very fast. They're really slow at moving on things. And they're not nearly as dynamic. And I like to have dynamic folks that are hungry for business.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you think back to when you started your business, or even like I said, I think, other business owners that you've helped out, are there things that you see that they should do different or that you would have done different if you were to start over?
If I was starting today, it would be an entirely different scenario because I'd have a different way to get out and touch people because technology is so different today.
Yeah.
And that's one of the more interesting aspects that I ask folks through SCORE as they come in. How are they getting their name out there? And it's interesting. It's even with the younger folks, as much as they may use things in terms of their understanding how to leverage those technology assets, whether it be Twitter or Instagram or Facebook and so on, they don't, and they don't recognize that one, they should, and then second, you can't do it once and hope it works.
Yeah.
You always have to, it's kind of like farming. You got to keep growing the crop, right? You got to keep putting things out there. And there's going to be the seasons, and you have to budget time. You have to be disciplined to budget time, right? And
Yeah.
make sure that you stay current out there. And when I talk about budgeting time, I make a to-do list on a piece of paper, right? And it's there every single day and it gets updated and I throw away the page and start over again. It's the only way that I have the discipline to stay on task, right?
Yeah, it's easy to get distracted, especially, if a lot of people are working from home, either because of COVID or because that's where they've started their business from. And working from home, there's a lot of easy distractions.
I got to tell you what, that's a key point. I hadn't thought about it until you just brought it up. I was always used to being in jobs where I was up and moving and out and about. And when you suddenly have to work from home and do things, your body goes through a change, right? You're used to activity. So I always get up and I go off and wander around and do things. Otherwise, I just start feeling like a slug after a while,
Mm-hmm.
right? The other thing about working from home, though, because there's definite upsides to it, the commute's really short.
Yeah.
The downside can be you have to budget time for yourself and family
Mm-hmm.
because there's 7 days a week, there's 24 hours a day. You can drop into your office anytime you want and work on stuff. And you have to tell yourself, no, it's okay to not do it. Unless you've got something that's burning or you have to do it, you just have to say, no, I'm going to do it on the to-do list when I said I was going to do it, not just suddenly jump in and do it because you can.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about scaling the business. I know that's something that we've talked about, but when you think about scaling a business, a lot of times what happens is that a business will sort of hit a plateau, and then getting past that plateau can be a challenge. What have you seen that has really helped push businesses past those plateaus?
And actually, it's up to the founder, quite candidly, or up to the executives. It's do they have the personality trait that allows them to let go? Because to scale the business means you have to do things through others. I personally have never expanded beyond just myself. I will work with other folks, but I never wanted to have a company. Other friends of mine have them, where they have multiple folks working underneath them. Because I personally didn't want to be responsible for generating revenue that put food on their table, right? I didn't
Mhm.
want that. I also, because my target audience are smaller companies that do not pay the bills that would allow me to scale with other folks. The other people that are in my industry that do what I do, they work with the big companies, therefore they can scale. So you need to
Mhm.
understand if you're going to scale, what's the revenue stream? And then secondly, how do you make that work with others that are under you that will take on parts of your project that you can facilitate, but don't go from working 50 hours a week to 80 hours a week because you got these folks. You still want to work the 50, these other folks are working the other extra hours, right?
Yes.
You have to be comfortable doing that. And if you
Mhm.
don't have, and if you know your personal trait is not letting go, I don't know that you can really scale.
Ah, that's a good point. What have you seen that has worked? So maybe with some of the companies that you've either mentored through SCORE or that you've worked with through your business, what have you seen that has worked for growing and scaling?
Here's a good one. The owners allow people who are experts they've hired to make mistakes. They may recognize that this person's going to do something, and as long as it's not going to be a big dollar mistake, let them make mistakes because that's how they learn.
Hmm.
If they think that you're always going to jump in and make sure they don't make a mistake, then you've never delegated. They're always going to come back to you.
Yeah.
I have a pet peeve about cell phones. I think they set back delegation of authority 20 years
Ah.
because heretofore you had to go find a payphone, right? And then
Yeah.
you would call, and they may or may not be on the other end of the line. Today, with the cell phone, people can call you right away, and too many owners, too many executives, instead of saying, what do you recommend? They go, well, here's the answer. And I just
Yeah.
think that's just wrong. You're not going to get people to, why are you paying people all this money to make decisions for you when suddenly they've taken their problem and made it your problem?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. I think that's a really good advice. So I want to end our conversation with one question regarding a prediction for the future of business. So if you were to make one prediction, what would it be?
When I read your question that came up that way, it's really, really simple. Wait 5 minutes, it's going to change the markets, right? It's like the weather, right? It's
Yeah.
going to always keep changing. Just be adaptive to it.
Hmm.
I think the one thing with business is be always looking out. And the business model that you currently have, is it going to continue to sustain and grow, or is it going to hit a point where it's going to start declining, right?
Hmm.
And you're not going to guess the stock market day to day, month to month, year to year. But when you start seeing the declining, either you're going to be one of the few that's left over that still has what's left, or you're going to adapt and move into something else, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Like I'll use an example of a company that I talk about with my clients, and they're a retail convenience store company in the East. It's called Wawa, right? And they actually started as a business before the Civil War. They were a steel foundry. They provided munitions to the Union Army to the north, right? Well,
Yeah.
after the Civil War, they transitioned from being steel. They got into the textile industry. That's a big change, right?
Yeah.
But they just said, no, this is where we're going. After textiles, because that went through its own transition in the economy, they then went from that and they got into the dairy business, right? And for the folks in the East, that they understood the dairy business and remember it, it used to be places you could pull up and you'd basically get your milk from the dairy store. Well, then they took the dairy store and converted those to convenience stores, but no gasoline. And about 15, 20 years ago, they started adding gasoline to their convenience stores. So they have adapted to how the economy changed, right?
Yeah.
Now, as individuals, you're going to adapt. So now I'll use caterers as a good one. What you are catering for today will change as the demographics of the communities you serve change, right? You
Hmm.
can't keep doing burgers if suddenly you don't have people that want burgers, right?
Yeah.
There you go. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I love it. So as this happens, we'll have to get together again and talk about all the changes that are occurring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being a guest. Thank you for all of the great mentoring advice you've given over the last 2.5 or almost 3 years, I think. So thank you.
You bet. Anytime. I've enjoyed it. I hope folks on the other end of this have enjoyed it also.
Absolutely. We'll chat again soon.
Thanks.